All right, so today we're going to be looking at India's development story,
Okay.
and specifically the shift from the Planning Commission to the NITI Aayog.
Right.
So this deep dive should be really helpful, whether you are like prepping for the UPSC exam,
Yep.
or you just want a clearer picture of how policy in India can really affect the entire nation.
Absolutely.
We've got a ton of different sources
Yeah.
here. We've got official documents from both of the institutions,
Okay.
critiques from important people who weighed in on this,
Right.
and even some parallels with the National Development Council, or the NDC, which was a key player in planning for decades.
Yeah, that's a really interesting parallel.
Yeah, it is.
It's fascinating how this whole shift from the Planning Commission to the NITI Aayog really reflects a change in India's approach
Yeah.
to governance and development, moving away from that top-down
Right.
centralized model
Right, yeah.
to something that was a bit more collaborative and
Yeah.
state-driven.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. So let's rewind all the way back to 1950.
Okay.
We've got a newly independent India,
Right.
full of hope, but also facing a lot of challenges.
Absolutely.
So that's where the Planning Commission kind of enters the scene.
Right. It was created to handle the enormous task of figuring out what resources they had,
Uh-huh.
formulating plans based on that,
Okay.
and then keeping tabs on the progress.
So it's like the Development Command Center.
Exactly. Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, so how was this command center actually structured, though?
Right. So they had technical divisions for different sectors.
Right.
They had branches for administrative work,
Uh-huh.
program advisors to coordinate with all the different states.
Wow.
They even had a program evaluation organization, or PEO,
Okay.
and that was to assess the impact of their plans.
So like a feedback loop?
Exactly, yeah, like a feedback loop.
Okay, so that sounds super complex.
Yeah.
Was it actually efficient?
That's where the problems start to come in. Over time, the Planning Commission, it started facing some criticism.
Mhm.
For example, you have D.R. Gadgil.
Okay.
He was actually a former deputy chairman.
Wow. Okay, so he knows what he's talking about.
Right. He felt like it was really overstepping its boundaries and
Right, yeah.
kind of interfering in areas beyond just development.
So it became too powerful.
Yeah. I mean, people started to say that.
Wow.
Like Ashok Chanda,
Okay.
he's an administrative analyst, and he actually labeled the Planning Commission an economic cabinet
Oh, wow.
for both the union and the states.
Okay, so basically a parallel government.
Yeah, essentially it was starting to look like that.
Wow. So if it's supposed to be this central planning body,
Right.
how did that work with the fact that India is a federal structure
Yeah, that's a really good point.
where states actually have their own powers?
Exactly.
Was there any concern that that balance was being messed up?
There was a lot of concern about that.
Really?
You had K. Santhanam. He was a constitutional expert.
Yeah.
He actually argued that the Planning Commission had essentially turned India into a unitary system,
Wow.
which goes against the way it's actually supposed to work.
Yeah, that's the opposite of what the design was.
Right.
So that concern about federalism really became a problem.
Yeah, a major problem.
Okay, so we had this powerful planning commission.
Right.
It was effective, but also got a lot of criticism.
Yeah, for being too centralized
Yeah.
and overreaching.
So this is perfect for transitioning to the NITI Aayog in 2015, right?
Yeah, and I think even the name itself is a big sign of that change.
Okay.
NITI Aayog stands for National Institution for Transforming India.
Okay.
So it's not just about planning anymore, it's about transforming.
Right, transforming.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot more dynamic.
Yeah.
So what were the reasons behind this change?
Well, I think it was a few things.
Okay.
I mean, India is not the same country as it was in 1950.
Right.
It wasn't just struggling for basic needs anymore.
It was becoming powerful.
Exactly. It was emerging as a global economic power.
Yeah.
So they needed a development model that reflected those changes.
So it was about adapting.
Yeah, adapting to this new reality.
Okay, so how did it actually differ?
So one major difference was
Yeah.
that the government wanted to be an enabler rather than a provider.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, take agriculture, for example.
Okay.
Before, the focus was all about food security.
Uh-huh.
But this shifted to boosting agricultural production,
Okay.
but also making sure farmers were getting good returns.
So not just producing food, but making sure the farmers were okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that a response to problems with the previous focus?
Yeah, I mean, prioritizing food security was really important when India first became independent.
Right, of course.
But sometimes it overlooked how the policies were affecting the farmers themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the new emphasis on returns was trying to fix that.
Okay, so that's one way NITI Aayog was different.
Right.
What about that problem of the Planning Commission being too powerful.
Right. So that's where the composition of NITI Aayog really stands out.
Okay, how so?
Unlike the Planning Commission, which was mostly political appointees,
Yeah.
NITI Aayog brings in experts and specialists from different fields.
So more perspectives.
Exactly. More perspectives and technical expertise.
Okay, so more brain power, basically.
Yeah, you could put it that way.
But was it just about adding experts, or was there a change in how they made decisions?
There was a change in the decision-making process.
Okay.
NITI Aayog is designed to be much more collaborative.
Uh-huh.
The prime minister is the chairperson.
Okay.
But then you have a governing council,
Yeah.
which is made up of all the chief ministers.
So the states have a direct voice.
Exactly.
That's a huge change.
It is. It's a big move to make sure the planning process is more inclusive
Yeah.
and takes into account the needs of each state.
And that helps address that problem of being too centralized.
Exactly. It's fostering that cooperative federalism
All
that
right.
was missing before.
So it sounds like there was a real effort to address the criticisms of the Planning Commission.
Definitely.
Making the government an enabler.
Yes.
Thinking about how farmers could prosper
Uh-huh.
and getting the states involved.
It was a big shift.
Yeah.
And I think that's reflected even further in the structure and functions of NITI Aayog.
Okay, so we should probably dive into that next.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to go from here. So NITI Aayog, it's got these specialized wings.
Okay.
You've got the research wing,
Uh-huh.
there's a consultancy wing,
Okay.
and then there's this really interesting one called the Team India wing.
Hold on, Team India.
Yeah.
That sounds like a sports team or something.
I know, right?
I'm guessing it's more complex than that.
It is, but I think the name is great.
Yeah.
It really captures what they're going for.
Okay.
Basically, it's supposed to be this platform
Uh-huh.
for constant collaboration between the central government and the states.
Oh, so it's like a permanent forum,
Yeah.
talking and coordinating between them.
Yeah, exactly, like a feedback loop.
Okay, so that's a far cry from that top-down approach of the Planning Commission.
Right, it's totally different. It's
Yeah.
designed to be much more inclusive
Uh,
and make sure the planning is responsive to what each state needs.
so each state has its own specific needs and priorities.
Right. And the Team India wing is supposed to make sure those are taken into account.
Okay, so I'm noticing a pattern here.
What's that?
It's not just about bringing in experts or involving the states.
Right.
It's about changing how development happens in India.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
It's a whole new mindset.
Exactly. And they call it competitive and cooperative federalism.
So the states are competing but also cooperating.
Yeah, they're supposed to learn from each other.
That's really interesting. How does that actually play out?
So NITI Aayog has these 7 pillars of effective governance.
7 pillars.
Wow. They guide everything they do.
Okay, what are they?
Well, there's things like pro-people,
Okay.
proactivity,
Uh-huh.
participation, empowerment,
Got it.
inclusion of all,
Okay.
equality and transparency.
So making the government work for the people.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, that sounds great in theory, but how does that actually work?
Well, let's look at Antyodaya.
Okay.
That's a really important principle for NITI Aayog.
Uh-huh.
It's all about uplifting the poorest people in society.
So focusing on the most marginalized people.
Exactly.
Okay.
That means prioritizing policies and programs that will help them the most.
So making sure the development is inclusive.
Yeah, inclusive and equitable.
Was that different from what the Planning Commission did?
I mean, the Planning Commission also wanted inclusive growth,
Right.
but NITI Aayog is more focused.
Okay.
It's about actually measuring if things are getting better for those who have been left behind.
So it's not just setting goals.
Right. It's about making sure those goals are achieved.
I see.
So you see this emphasis on social justice and
Yeah.
inclusion.
What about the economics, though?
Right. Economic growth is still important,
Of course.
but not at the expense of social equity
Right.
or the environment.
So it's about finding a balance.
Yeah, finding that balance between progress and responsibility.
So not just growth at any cost.
Exactly.
They're trying to change that old way of thinking.
Right. It's about sustainable development.
Okay, so NITI Aayog has a vision,
Yeah.
a structure that's collaborative,
Uh-huh.
and it's focusing on social justice and sustainable growth.
That's right.
But like with anything new, there's always critics.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
What are some of the criticisms of NITI Aayog?
Well, some people think it's just a surface level change.
Okay.
Like Sitaram Yechuri from the CPIM,
Uh-huh.
he said it was just cosmetic and didn't really change anything substantial.
So a rebranding, but not a real transformation.
That's what he thinks. Yeah.
Did he have specific concerns?
Yeah, one worry is that NITI Aayog might still favor the central government over the states.
Even though it's supposed to be about cooperative federalism.
Right, and some people worry that states might feel pressured to go along with what the center wants.
That's a valid concern.
Yeah, especially with how things have been between the center and states in India.
Historically, yeah.
Right.
Were there any other big criticisms?
Yeah, another one came from Manish Tiwari.
Okay.
He's from the Congress Party.
Yeah.
And he was worried that NITI Aayog was too close to corporate interests.
Okay.
He thought that could lead to policies that put profits ahead of people.
That's a serious concern.
It is, yeah, especially with all the inequality in India.
Right.
So these criticisms are important. They
Mhm.
show that we need to keep an eye on things.
Keep them accountable.
Exactly. Make sure NITI Aayog is actually doing what it's supposed to do.
Okay, so no institution is perfect,
No, definitely not.
but it's about making sure they serve the people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we move on to the National Development Council,
Yeah.
I think it's worth highlighting how important NTI Aayog is for anyone studying for the UPSC exam.
Oh, definitely.
Understanding this whole shift from the Planning Commission to NTI Aayog,
Right.
it's crucial.
Yeah. It's not just about memorizing facts.
Right. It's about understanding the philosophy behind it.
Yeah. The challenges, the potential impact.
Exactly. And the UPSC is all about analyzing these things.
It tests your ability to think critically about policies and institutions.
Right. And NTI Aayog is the perfect case study.
Yeah, it's complex, it's ambitious, and there's all this debate about how effective it is.
So for anyone prepping for the UPSC, pay attention.
Yeah, this is real-world stuff.
This is how governance and development actually work in India.
Okay, so now let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about the National Development Council.
Yeah, the
It
NDC.
was a key player for a long time,
Right.
but its story is really tied to NITI Aayog.
It is, yeah. So let's go back and look at the history of the NDC.
Yeah, let's see how it shaped India's development.
So the NDC, it was formed way back in 1952,
Okay.
just a few years after the Planning Commission.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting, actually, it wasn't mandated by the Constitution.
Oh, really?
Yeah, or any specific law for that matter.
Okay.
It came about through an executive resolution. Huh. So it's more of a flexible thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, interesting. So if it wasn't legally required, then what gated its authority?
Well, it was all about who was in it.
Well,
You had the prime minister in there,
okay.
all the union cabinet ministers,
Wow.
every chief minister,
Wow.
and members of the planning commission.
That's a lot of powerful people.
It is, yeah, a serious concentration of power.
So what were they actually doing?
Well, the main idea was to make sure the central government and the states were all on the same page
Okay.
when it came to planning and development.
So a platform for discussion.
Yeah, they'd talk, debate, and try to come to some kind of agreement.
Did it have any real power, though?
Officially, no.
Okay.
Its role was just advisory.
So it couldn't actually force anyone to do anything.
Right. But because of all those important people involved, their suggestions carried a lot of weight.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was rare for anyone to just ignore what they said.
So it sounds like a delicate balance.
Yeah, they had to be careful not to overstep.
So was it actually effective?
Well, that's where you get different opinions.
Okay.
Some people saw it as this super cabinet,
Okay.
like it had real influence on national policy,
Uh,
but others thought it was just a rubber stamp for the union government,
oh, interesting.
especially when one party was in control of both the center and the states.
So its effectiveness was tied to the political climate.
Yeah, definitely.
What about when there were coalition governments?
Right, or when regional parties had more say.
Yeah.
Then the NDC became even more important.
Because it gave the states a way to push back.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like the NDC played a big role in making sure the states had a voice.
Yeah, it helped to maintain that balance of federalism in India.
But then what happened?
Well, in 2016,
Okay.
the Modi government decided to get rid of the NDC.
Really, they just abolished it.
Yeah, and all its powers went to the Governing Council of NITI Aayog.
So it was absorbed into this new structure.
Right.
What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, officially, it was all about efficiency. They said that NITI Aayog's Governing Council could do everything the NDC was doing,
Uh-huh.
but with less bureaucracy.
So streamlining things.
Yeah, making it all more straightforward.
But I'm guessing not everyone was happy about it,
No, you're right.
especially those who saw the NDC as important for federalism.
Exactly. They worried that getting rid of it would mean the central government had too much power.
Right. And that's a valid concern.
It is, especially in a country as diverse as India.
So even today, that change is still being debated.
Yeah, some people think it was a good move, others aren't so sure.
It's amazing how Something like administrative restructuring
Yeah.
can have such big political consequences.
It shows that these aren't just abstract ideas.
Right.
They have real impacts on people's lives.
Okay, so let's take a step back and look at the big picture.
Okay.
We started with the Planning Commission,
Right.
how it came about, what it did, and why it eventually got replaced. Then we talked about NITI Aayog.
Yeah, its goals, its structure, and some of the worries people have about it.
And finally, we went over the National Development Council
How it worked to promote that cooperation between the center and states.
and how it was ultimately abolished.
Yeah, it's a long journey.
It is from the Planning Commission all the way to NITI Aayog.
It shows how much India's thinking about governance and development has changed.
It's a story of evolution,
Yeah.
adaptation, and constant debate,
And it's a story that anyone who wants to understand India needs to know.
especially those studying for the UPSC.
Absolutely. This deep dive has given you all the background you need.
The historical context, the structures, the criticisms.
It's all fair.
So now it's your turn to think about it critically.
Yeah. What worked, what didn't.
What were the consequences, both intended and unintended?
Right. And remember, the UPSC isn't just about memorizing facts.
You need to show that you can analyze things from different angles.
Ask yourself those tough questions.
Yeah, like what were the problems with the Planning Commission's approach?
Did NITI Aayog fix them or create new ones?
What's going to happen to federalism in India?
These are the kinds of questions that will really make you understand this stuff.
And for those of you not taking the UPSC,
Yeah.
this is still important.
Yes.
Knowing how these institutions work affects all of us.
It's about being an informed citizen.
So you can participate in the conversation about India's future.
Hold your leaders accountable.
Exactly.
Work towards making India a better place.
So whether you're a future civil servant,
Or just someone who cares about India.
remember this conversation isn't over.
Keep learning. Keep asking questions.
Keep pushing for a better India.
That's what it's all about.
And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.